Happy Purim, everyone. This is Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachot, page 51, on top of the page. And it's this is the Daf for Purim for most of the world, the 14th day of Adar, although in Jerusalem, Purim is celebrated on the 15th of Adar. It's called Shushan Purim, which is for cities with a wall around it. Like Jerusalem was. Well, the old city had a wall, but it includes the rest of Jerusalem. And so I figured I'd start the festivities and include, both of the days. So this is a daf for the 14th of Adar. Menachot 51a, top of the page, with the words Hare Hi K'minchas Tamidin. This teaches that the halacha of the griddle cake offering of the high priest. By the way, Aaron HaKohen is Gematria Purim. 336. High priest. Aaron HaKohen, it's Purim, connection. 336. High priest is like that of the meal offering. That, by the way, last year in Sanhedrin, it actually mentioned Purim on the daf of Purim, which is interesting. It was Sanhedrin 87. A high priest is like that of the meal offering that is competent. Other daily offerings as a component of the daily offerings. The daily offerings override Shabbat. As the verse says, this is the burnt offering of every Shabbat, beside the continual burnt offering and the drink offering thereof. Numbers 28:10. Therefore, preparing the griddle cake offering of the high priest likewise overrides Shabbat. Rava Amar Machavas Melamed Shetuno Kli V'i Apela Mi'etmol If Ipsila Lebelina Tanya Kavase de Rave Al Machavas Melamed Shetuno Kli. Rava said that the basis for it overriding Shabbat is the fact that the verse states on a griddle, Leviticus 6:14, which teaches that the griddle cake offering of the high priest requires a vessel. Therefore, if he had baked it in the previous day rather than on Shabbat, it would be disqualified by being left overnight, since the loaves had already been consecrated in a service vessel. It is taught in a Braita in accordance with the opinion of Rava. On a griddle teaches that the griddle cake offering of the high priest requires a vessel. The Braita continues, the continuation of the verse states, it shall be made with the oil. The fact that the verse makes reference to the oil rather than just oil indicates that one is supposed to add extra oil to it, but I do not know how much oil to add. Hareni dan nemar kan shemen v'nemar ala b'minchas nesochim shemen malal shloshes lugin nesoin afkan shloshes lugin nesoin. Therefore, I must deduce as follows. It is stated here, concerning the griddle cake offering of the high priest, oil, and it is stated with regard to the meal offering brought with the libations that accompany animal offerings, a 10th part of an ephah of fine flour mingled with a 4th part of a hin beaten oil. Exodus 29:40. Just as there with regard to the meal offering brought with the libations, the amount of oil required is 3 log per 10th of an ephah of flour, so too here in the case of the griddle cake offering of the high priest, one brings 3 log of oil per 10th of an ephah of flour. O klach lederzo nemar kan shemen v'nemar minchas nidov shemen malala noga echad avkan noga echad. But perhaps go this way. Interesting. O klach lederzo. You don't see it so often. Or perhaps go this way is stated. 1 second. You're back. Not 1 second, but 1 moment. A few minutes. Continuing. Or perhaps go this way. It is stated here concerning the griddle cake offering of the high priest, oil, and it is stated with regard to a voluntary meal offering, and when anyone brings a meal offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil upon it. Leviticus 2, verse 1. Just as there, with regard to the voluntary offering. A second here. Get some juice in here. Dude. Sombrero is not very practical. It's huge. It's bumping into everything. Okay. Second here. Down, 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 down. Okay. Or perhaps go this way. It is stated here. Yeah, concerning the griddle cake offering of the high priest. Oklakzu. Oh, he said this already, right? Concerning the griddle cake offering the high priest oil, and then it stated with regard to the voluntary meal offering. And when anyone brings a meal offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil upon Leviticus 2:1. Just as there with regard to a voluntary offering, one brings 1 log of oil for each tenth of an ephah of flour. See 88a, so too here, one brings 1 log of oil for each tenth of an ephah of flour. Venira lemi domeh. Denin tabesht mitabesht. Tadir ba'a chova docha shabbat docha tumah. The Bright analyzes the two possibilities. Let's see to which case is more similar, meaning which is a better comparison to the griddle cake offering of the high priest. Perhaps we should derive the halacha with regard to the griddle cake offering of the high priest, which has characteristics represented by the letters Vav, Bet, Shin, Tet from the halacha with regard to a meal offering brought with libations, which also has the characteristics represented by the letters Taf, Bet, Shin, Tet. These characteristics are that they are frequent. Tadir, as these offerings are sacrificed twice daily, they are brought as an obligation. They override Shabbat, and they override impurity. Ein danin tabesht mishenu tabesht. We should not derive the halach with regard to the griddle cake offering of the high priest, which has the characteristics represented by the letters Taf, Bet, Shin, Tet from the voluntary meal offering, which does not have the characteristics represented by letters Taf, Bet, Shin, Tet. Oklach derzu Danin Yagil Miyagil Yachid Biglal Atzma Yain Levona. Or perhaps go this way. We should derive the halacha with regard to the griddle cake offering from the high priest, which has the characteristics represented by the letters Yud Gimel, Yud Lamed from the voluntary meal offering, which also has the characteristics represented by the letters Yud Gimel, Yud Lamed, which stand for the following halacha. Each of these offerings may be brought by an individual, Yachid. Each is brought for Biglal, its own sake, rather than accompanying another offering. They are not accompanied by wine, yayin, for a libation, and they require frankincense, levona. Ve'indanin yagil, mishen yagil, and we should not derive the halacha with regard to griddle cake offering of the high priest, which has the characteristics represented by the letters Yud Gimel, Yud Lamed, from the halacha with regard to the meal offering brought with libations, which does not have the characteristics represented by the letters Yud Gimel, Yud Lamed. Consequently, the comparisons in both directions are equally compelling. Rabbi Shmuel beno Shal Rabbi Yochanan ben Brokah Omer Soiles mincha tamin arehi lechol minchas tamidin ma minchas tamidin shlosh lugin nasoin avzu shlosh lugin nasoin. The Brisa continues its determination of how much oil is brought with the griddle cake offering of the high priest. Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Brokah, says, this is the offering of Aaron, the 10th part of an ephah of fine flour with the meal offering, perpetually tamid, half of it in the morning and half in the evening. Leviticus 6:13. Leviticus 6:13. The fact that the verse makes reference to the griddle cake offering of the high priest as tamid teaches that it is in the same category of the meal offering component of the daily offerings to be eating, just as the meal offering component of the daily offerings requires 3 logs of oil for each tenth of an ephah of flour, so too this griddle cake offering of the high priest requires 3 logs of oil for each tenth of an ephah of flour. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Riba kan shemin, Riba keminchas, kivosim shemin, malahalan shloishes lugin nisoin, avkan shloishes lugin nisoin. Rabbi Shimon says the verse adds the amount of oil that is required here with regard to the griddle cake offering of the high priest, and similarly adds to the amount of oil that is required there in the case of the meal offering that accompanies the sacrifice of sheep. Just as there in the case of the meal offering that accompanies the sacrifice of sheep, 3 logs of oil are required for each tenth of an ephah of flour, so too here, in the case of the griddle cake offering of the high priest, 3 logs of oil are required for each tenth of an ephah of flour. O klach l'derech zo. Whoa. We got a fly here. O klach l'derech zo. Riba kan shemen, riba chemin chas paim. Ve'elim shemen malahalan shtei glugin nisarin, afkan shtei glugin nisarin. Or perhaps go this way, the verse adds the amount of oil that's required, and it similarly adds the amount of oil that is required in the case of the meal offering that accompanies the sacrifice of bulls and rams. Just as there in the case of the meal offering that accompanies the sacrifice of bulls and rams, 2 log of oil required for each tenth of an ephah of flour, which we hear in the case of a griddle cake offering of the high priest, 2 log of oil required for each tenth of an ephah of flour. Nira limidomed, ani mincha boin esain, mincha boin misain. Bein ani mincha boin misain, mimincha haba shnai v'shloisha yisrainim. With regard to the 2 possibilities, let us see which case is more similar, meaning to which is a better comparison to the griddle cake offering of the high priest. Perhaps we should derive the halacha with regard to the griddle cake offering of the high priest, which is a meal offering that comes in the amount of a tenth of an ephah of flour from the meal offering that accompanies the sacrifice of sheep, which is also a meal offering that comes in the amount of a tenth of an ephah of flour, and we should not derive the halacha with regard to a meal offering that comes in the amount of a tenth of an ephah of flour from the halacha in the case of a meal offering that comes in the amount of 2 or 3 tenths of an ephah of flour, such as the meal offerings that accompany the sacrifice of bulls and rams. Hagufa kasha. The Gemara asks a question with regard to the beginning of the bride. The bride itself is difficult, as it contains an internal contradiction. First, you said that the expression "with the oil" stated in the verse concerning the griddle cake offering of the high priest serves to add extra oil, which indicates that more than the basic amount of 1 log of oil is required. And then it's stated there concerning the griddle cake offering of the high priest oil, and it is stated with regard to the voluntary meal offering that it must be brought with oil. The bride suggests that just as 1 log of oil is brought with the voluntary meal offering, so too 1 log is brought with the griddle cake offering of the high priest. Amar Abaye mantana b'shemen oisi v'b'shemen hi bila nema koman komehada Rabbi Ishmael. In answer to his question, Abaye said, "Who is the Tana who taught that the term with the oil with regard to the griddle cake offering of the high priest serves to add extra oil? It is Rabbi Shimon who holds that 3 log of oil required as derived from the meal offering that accompanies the sacrifice of sheep." Rabbi Shimon is speaking, utilizing the style of, if it were not stated, if the verse had not indicated by the term with the oil that extra oil is required, it would have been possible to derive from the voluntary meal offering that only 1 log is required, and who is the Tana who responds? Who is the Tana who responds to Rabbi Shimon's derivation suggests that the fact that the amount of oil can be derived from the case of the voluntary meal offering, it is Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Huna b'rei Rabbi Shomar, Kudla Rabbi Yishmael b'no, Sher Rabbi Yochanan b'broka hi. Rabbi Huna son of Rabbi Yeshua said that the brayta should be understood differently. The entire brayta is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yochanan b'broka, who derives that 3 log of oil are required in the griddle cake offering based upon the amount required in the meal offering component of the daily offering. So, Hamar b'shemen l'haisif lo shemen di likva shemen lo yitzorich keven nechasiv al machavas minchas machavas tamyo. And with regard to the possibility of deriving that only 1 log is required as the voluntary meal offering, this is what it's saying. The term with the oil stated with regard to the griddle cake offering of the high priest comes to add more oil to it than the single law required for the voluntary meal offering, as if the purpose of that term were merely to establish the basic fact that offering must include oil. A verse is not needed to teach that, since it is written with respect to the griddle cake offering of the high priest on a griddle. Machavat, Leviticus 6:14, is comparable to a pan, machavat meal offering, which requires oil. Or perhaps the purpose of the verse is to establish only that the offering must include oil, and is necessary to teach that, because if the verse 1 had not stated with the oil, I would say, let it be like a meal offering of a sinner, which does not include oil. Rabbi Shmuel said, let it even be that the purpose of the verse is to establish only that it requires oil, and even so, one can arrive at the conclusion that 3 log are required due to the derivation based upon the verbal analogy from the meal offering brought with libations accompanying animal offerings. But although Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Rocha, attempts to employ this derivation, he is unsuccessful, as there is counter indication from another verbal analogy to the voluntary meal offering. Therefore, Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Rocha, needed to derive the halacha from the verse "fine flour for meal offering perpetually," Leviticus 6:13. As Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Rocha, concluded his statement in the Braita, Rabba Amar Kula Rabbi Shimon V'inu. Rabba said the Braita should be understood differently. The Braita is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon is speaking utilizing the style of, if it were not stated, we can do this. בשמן לא יסב לשמן לגוי אלא שמן לא יצריך כיוון דכתיב בעל מחץ כמחץ דמיה ועד שלא יהיה עמם בשמן לא יש לי בדין. And this is what Rabbi Shimon is saying. The term with the oil serves to add the extra oil to it, as if the purpose of the term were merely to establish that the offering must include oil. A verse is not included to teach that, since it is written with respect to the griddle cake offering of the high priest on a griddle, Leviticus 6:14, is comparable to a pan meal offering which requires oil. And even if the verse had not stated with oil, I have a manner of derivation for the fact that more than one log of oil is required based upon a verbal analogy, but non dina. But although Rabbi Shimon attempts to employ this derivation, he is unsuccessful, as there is a counterindication from another verbal analogy, and therefore the term when the oil is needed to teach that more than 1 log of oil is required. Nevertheless, this teaches only that more oil than usual is required, but the specific amount still must be clarified. Rabbi Shimon then said, let the griddle cake offering the high priest be like the meal offering that accompanies the sacrifice, bulls and rams, which require 2 log of oil per ephah of flour. Hadar Amar Doni. Rabbi Shimon then said, we should derive the halacha. We finished there. We'll stop here. Pick it up in the next daf. Next amud,